Y'all ready? All right, y'all, we're gonna go ahead and get started if you could find a seat. All right, thank you everybody for joining us this morning. This is the Cross-Cutting Coastal Resilience Efforts and Building Strategic Climate Partnerships in North Carolina session. This is where you want to be good. If not, welcome. And welcome to everybody who is on Zoom as well. Thank you for joining us. I'm really excited to welcome everybody to this session today. My name is Sarah Spiegler. I'm the Coastal Resilience Specialist at North Carolina Sea Grant, and I have an awesome panel waiting to speak to you today as well. I'm really excited about this topic. You guys have heard a lot about Sea Grant this week. I am in our Morehead City office at the NC State Center for Marine Sciences and Technology. And our speakers today come from across coastal North Carolina. We've got Jacob Boyd with the North Carolina Division of Marine Fisheries in Morehead City, Andrea Webster, who's with NCOR, and she's located in Raleigh, Mackenzie, Todd, and Krista Early from the Division of Coastal Management in Morehead City, Lora, Eddy from the Nature Conservancy in Nags Head, and Holly White, who is also with NCOR, and she is located in Elizabeth City. So we're really excited to talk to you about this topic today. And it's a little bit different than the other sessions. We're gonna have each presenter talk for about 10 to 15 minutes, so not too long. We're gonna hold most of the questions till the end, and then we'll have a panel discussion where we really want audience participation. So keep your questions. So just as an overview, I'm going to start this session off talking about some climate impacts in coastal North Carolina and also how we have moved forward at the state level since Hurricane Florence in 2018. So first of all, why do we do this work here in North Carolina? I will say I love living in coastal North Carolina. I've lived in Beaufort, North Carolina now for over 10 years, and it is a great place to live, work, and play. So that's kind of why we do this work. We also have over 12,000 miles of estuarine and ocean shorelines, and we have these extensive natural resources that support our coastal economy and also a growing resident population. So we have a lot of changes also occurring in coastal North Carolina. Along with our growing resident population, we have climate change. So we have more intense storms, greater rainfall, and rising sea levels. And so we know climate change impacts are happening now in North Carolina, and we also know they're going to continue to get worse. And what this means is that climate change is going to continue to exacerbate things that we already manage. So we call it a threat multiplier. So for example, we have sea level rise, and that will continue to increase elevation of our water table. So that affects a lot of things. It affects erosion, inundation, our groundwater and wastewater systems, our water quality. This is downtown Beaufort where I live. This is about a year ago during the King Tide event. The salt water came up through the storm drains and flooded the roads, and also this unfortunate car parked downtown. I still don't know whose car that is. So what does all this change mean for our coastal communities? These are some of the challenging questions that a lot of our communities are grappling with right now. And this includes things like, how do we best protect our people, our built environment, our coastal ecosystems? How do we plan, respond, recover, and adapt? When do we start considering managed retreat, or sometimes we call it equitable or strategic relocation? And then how do we safeguard the rights of the most vulnerable populations and build momentum for climate justice solutions? So this photo is from down east North Carolina, and this is a ghost forest. And so we're seeing a lot more of these in down east and around the coast. This is when saltwater intrusion kills the trees. Makes for a cool picture. And actually this photo is by Carl, who's sitting right there. So we also think a lot about resilience when we're talking about climate change, and we think that it's important to define resilience because it's being used in a lot of different contexts now. So in our field, we think about resilience as how fast and in what fashion a system can bounce back after a disturbance. Although now we're talking a lot about resilience as bouncing forward after the disturbance, and that's important because we want to think about planning for future conditions and not what's happening right now because things are changing so quickly. We also distinguish between community resilience and ecosystem resilience. And that's important because you're going to hear more about this later, looking at the intersection of those two things. So if you see this photo, again, this is downtown Beaufort, and this is the marina that's normally filled with boats. This is 2 days before Florence hit in 2018, and all the boats were required to leave the marina. So the only time you see no boats here is right before a hurricane or right after a hurricane. And when we think about ecosystem and community resilience, we often think about things like these saltwater marshes. If we increase the ecosystem resilience, they're going to be able to better protect the infrastructure and the buildings right behind them. When that storm surge comes in from the hurricane, it'll slow down those waves, and so it'll help with the community resilience behind it. So those are, we think about those strategies a lot. And again, we want to think about the triple bottom line. So how can we find these win-win-win solutions that are good for our communities, our economies, and our ecosystems? So what are some other challenges we have with this concept of building resilience and bouncing forward? What is this new normal, and what are these future conditions we're planning for? We do know that, we've talked about this in North Carolina for a long time now. Communities facing the greatest risks often have the least resources to address them. We know that resilience is really complex. There's no, as we heard the secretary say yesterday, there's no one-size-fits-all solution. And we know that climate impacts often exacerbate inequitable social conditions. So we were having all these conversations in North Carolina, and then 2018 happened and Hurricane Florence happened. And we had about $24 billion of damage from Florence. 22 billion of that was here in North Carolina. And these are photos from New Bern after the hurricane, where there was over $100 million in damages. And Florence flooded a lot of low-lying inland and low-income communities, and a lot of those communities are still recovering today. So what happened after Florence? It really sped that conversation up about how do we increase the resilience in our state. We had Governor Cooper's Executive Order 80, North Carolina's commitment to address climate change and transition to a clean energy economy in 2018. The North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resilience was also created, and then the North Carolina Climate Risk Assessment and Resilience Plan was published in 2020. And you're going to hear more about these efforts from our great speakers later. Jacob's going to go next and talk about the integration of some of these plans at the state level as well. So the conversation continued after Florence. What can we do to help communities? And the Division of Coastal Management hosted 2 regional resilience workshops in 2019, one in Elizabeth City and one in Wilmington. They heard from a bunch of stakeholders, and then there was a culminating coastal resilience summit in Havelock. And what a lot of the stakeholders told the state is, we don't have the technical expertise on staff at the community level, the local government level, to do this resilience planning. So another effort that came out of after Hurricane Florence, and I'm not going to go into these too much because you're going to hear about them later, is the DCM-led Resilient Coastal Communities Program, and then the NCORE-led Regions Innovating for Strong Economies in the Environment, or RISE. And Brian, I think, who's here, gave a great talk about that yesterday. So what can we do? We know that this is a really complex problem to address. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. We know we need to work collaboratively. We know we need to use science and local knowledge. We need to find those win-win-win co-benefit solutions. We need to equitably engage our communities. And then this is the one we're going to talk about more today. We're going to talk about all of them, but we're going to talk about coordinating efforts on a larger scale and across agencies and organizations. And then this last one, partnerships are key. I think we've heard this week. Sea Grant can't do anything on their own. This is really complex. All these partnerships are really important when we're addressing climate adaptation. And then finally, so here's some lessons learned that our group's been talking about, that we've been seeing. And we're kind of thinking about this today as we're talking to you guys. So if you have questions at the end, please feel free to bring them up. We have seen a shift since 2018, since Hurricane Florence. We've seen an increase in resources, attention, and partnerships. We've seen many great collaborations, coordination, synergistic efforts. We've seen integration of resilience planning across many sectors, agencies, partners, and communities. We're seeing more local decision makers considering climate change and sea level rise, and we see a desired role for these government agencies and organizations and universities to support resilience. But of course, we know there are still many challenges. The coordination is happening, but we need even more of it because these resilience efforts are exploding. We need to continue to think about the barriers and challenges to implementing adaptation. Capacity and time for staff and communities, you're going to hear that all day long. That's, still a challenge. And then, of course, that resources often follow socioeconomic inequities. And that's it right now from me. So I think we're going to go to the next, So we're going to go on to the next speaker, Jacob Boyd, who again is with the Division of Marine Fisheries in Morehead City.
Good morning. My name is Jacob Boyd, and I am the Habitat and Enhancement Section Chief for the North Carolina Division of Marine Fisheries, which is within the Department of Environmental Quality. And today I'm going to kind of build off of what Sarah was talking about and kind of give a general overview of how the department is collaborating with multiple organizations and other agencies. I try to find some of these resilient synergies from all of the really great and important work that's going on. And then some of the other speakers will go into more depth on some of the specific things that I list. So as Sarah said, in 2018, following Governor Cooper's Executive Order 80 to address climate change in North Carolina, there's been a lot of efforts going on, and it's been really great. There's been challenging in aspects of having so much stuff going on, but that's good problems to have for this. So Executive Order 80 was meant to address climate change by incorporating mitigation and adaptation into all of our state operations and policies. This was meant to protect human life and health, property, natural and built infrastructure, and the cultural resources that support it. So through all of these different plans that came out of the Executive Order 80, the Climate Risk Assessment and Resilience Plan, the Natural Working Lands Action Plan, the Clean Energy Plan, and the 2021 Coastal Habitat Protection Plan Amendment all incorporated all these different aspects of climate adaptation and resilience. And now we are really working to synergize those and make sure there's a lot of overlapping efforts to make sure we are, and with my administrator hat on, working smarter, not harder, to incorporate into our daily operations, into our programs. And that's all to prioritize actions that are going to increase resilience, carbon sequestration, and environmental justice. Also, the upcoming 2023 Hazard Mitigation Plan is also including nature-based solutions and other overlaps with the Resilience Plan. So the North Carolina Coastal Habitat Protection Plan, as you heard from Secretary Baxter yesterday, the Coastal Habitat Protection Plan, which we lovingly refer to as the CHIP, plays a very important role in prioritizing these actions for coastal habitats throughout North Carolina. So the plan, we were updating, the first Coastal Habitat Protection Plan was completed in 2004, and it was authorized by the 1997 Fisheries Reform Act to go along with the Fishery Management Plan and how we manage our fisheries in the state. So it gets updated, reviewed every 5 years, and the review for this last iteration, the 2021 amendment, coincided with the development of the Risk and Resilience Plan and Natural Working Lands Plan. So we ensured that the recommendations were connected to each other, and so that way when implementation came, we were all on the same page with the different plans. So the CHIP summarizes the best available science that we have for North Carolina's 2.5 million acres of airstream waters, which is the most on the East Coast. That's home to a really greatest biodiversity and tons of different organisms that utilize it. So there's 4 overarching goals for the CHIP. Improve effectiveness of rules or programs that protect these critical coastal fish habitats, identify and delineate strategic habitat areas, enhance and protect these habitats, and then enhance and protect the water quality, which, as we all know, the water quality is the common denominator that impacts our coastal habitats, our fisheries, and everything that encompasses our ecosystems. So for the 2021 CHIP amendment, we had 5 priority issues: protect and restore the wetlands, oysters, and submerged aquatic vegetation, improve water quality, flood-proof wastewater infrastructure, and monitor coastal habitats to prioritize these actions. So there's been a lot of great work that's going on for the CHIP and over the last 15 years pertaining to living shorelines, oyster restoration, through our oyster sanctuary program, strategic habitat areas, coastal stormwater rules, and all of this would not have been accomplished without that collaboration and partnership with multiple agencies, organizations, and nonprofits. So it really does take a team to be able to leverage those resources and be able to accomplish these goals. So why care about habitat protection? Well, first and foremost, coastal habitats is a really valuable economic resource for North Carolina, with 90% of our North Carolina fishery species utilizing them and are estuarine dependent. The commercial and recreational fishery industries has an estimated economic impact value of over $4.3 billion annually. And of course, it's very culturally significant to North Carolina, as we've heard, working in communities. We heard yesterday, working in down east communities, it's really a part of their life and a part of their culture. So it's really even hard to put an economic value on that, but it has a huge value. But even if you don't like to fish or like to eat fish, which don't tell me because then I might hold it against you, these coastal habitats provide even more valuable resources to North Carolina. Includes floodwater control, carbon sequestration, helping with greenhouse gas and carbon mitigation, water quality, erosion control, and storm protection. It hosts a great amount of biodiversity. And it also brings in a lot of other economic value from recreation and tourism to the economy. And it really all ties back down to the ecosystem and community resilience, as Sarah was talking about, bringing that connection in, because you can't think about these issues in silos anymore, because what we do to protect our coastal habitats and increase that ecosystem resilience has that impact on the community and vice versa. So as Sarah previously said, climate change impacts are currently happening, and they're just going to increase and exacerbate the already issues that we already have going on with habitat loss and water quality degradation. So this figure, I think, does a really good job of looking at kind of the water quality cycle and how all of these land activities impact our coastal estuaries and resources, but then also how climate change impacts, like increased storm frequency, rainfall, and variable salinity and water temperature all exacerbate the situation. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's a very complicated issue, and that's why it's important to be thinking about these things together and not working in silos, because what we do on land and in the water all connect to each other. And with the CHIP, it's regulated by the 3 environmental commissions: the Environmental Management Commission, the Marine Fisheries Commission, and the Coastal Resources Commission, because us in the fisheries world can do and pass measures to protect water quality all day long, but all of these upland activities that are actually hurting the water quality need to be addressed holistically. So you might ask, Jacob, how do we go about doing this? I would say that's a great question. The first thing we need to do is find those intersections between community and ecosystem resilience. And I borrowed this figure from TNC because I think it does a really good job of kind of breaking down those steps. So you have to find those intersections where you identify those nature-based or green infrastructure solutions where coastal communities can increase their resilience, effectively protecting, restoring, and sustainably managing their natural resources, while also strengthening local capacity for climate adaptation. And just as an example, the CHIP would fall under this identifying solutions and making these recommended actions to help take action for the communities and the local municipalities. So to find these intersections, it's important to not just focus on the direct benefit of whatever action or project or efforts you're doing, but again, look at it more holistically and also look at those co-benefits of what they're, because there's a lot of efforts that can be made in the restoration world for looking at ecosystem resilience that again, also can create that community resilience. So it's also taking it a step further. How can you take that and where the carbon sequestration? So if you're doing, let's say, a floodplain buyout, the community, that the recommendation of the community is do a floodplain buyout to create community resilience. How can you put other nature-based solutions in there to enhance the ecosystem resilience, but also what kind of carbon sequestration, carbon mitigation credits should you be getting for protecting, that 10 acres or however much of floodplain? So again, with my administrator hat on, trying to get the most bang for your buck. When you're trying to justify getting resources, trying to justify having multiple things to point to, and those boxes you're checking off is going to greatly enhance your potential funding opportunities. So we are actively incorporating the different CHIP and EO80 recommendations into these existing efforts. So, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel on some of these things. We're looking at some of these on the ground actions we can do now and some of these great opportunities and efforts that are going on where we can incorporate a lot of these recommendations into there and not create new programs or create new working groups where we don't need to. So this slide is very busy, but that's on purpose because I want to just kind of show how many partners we have working on this and on how many different levels and different efforts that we have. So, much of this has been accomplished just over the last 4 years, and I credit that to just the amazing staff that we have at the different organizations. The crew that we have up here, it's been a privilege to work with them over the last couple of years on this stuff because everybody is passionate about stuff. They want to make change, and they are doers. And if anybody knows me, I like to be involved with groups that are doers and not just sit around and talk all day. So these are just a few examples of how we are incorporating some of this with the RCCP and RISE, which y'all will hear more about in a minute. But we're looking at these existing programs and where can we, some of these overlapping recommendations from the Climate Risk and Assessment Plan and from the CHIP amendment, where can we incorporate that into those existing efforts? So when they're working with these communities on how to increase their resilience, making sure to account for some of the CHIP recommendations or some of the other EO80 recommendations that would also be incorporated into whatever efforts that they're doing. And that's it. So we have Andrea Webster coming up.
Do you want to do one question?
And does anybody have one question?
We have time for one question if you want. Or we can save until the end. All right. Next, we have Andrea Webster, who is from the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resilience.
Right. Thanks, Sarah. I also want to thank you for organizing this panel, Sarah. You've done an amazing job, and it's nice to have the coordination in advance. I think it really helps. So before I get started, I'd love to hear from you all, at least by hand, on who's in the room. So who is here from local government? City, town, county, council of government, one. Okay. State government. A few more. Federal government. I know there's a few NOAA folks in the room. Okay. Academia. Most folks. Okay. Consultants. All right. And nonprofits. K through 12. Excellent. All right. Did I forget anybody? For-profits. Thank you. All right. Okay, great. That's helpful for me. This is my first time at this event, so I was really curious about who the attendees might be. So my background is in local government, and then I also worked in academia, working with local governments, all on climate, and now I'm working for state government. So it's been a nice kind of career trajectory to really introduce me to how things work at different levels. So my name is Andrea Webster. I'm with the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency, which, as Sarah and Jacob said, is new. Has anybody not, I guess maybe who has heard of NCOR before? Okay, good. And who hasn't? This is your first time. A few of you. Great. Okay. Well, for those of you that haven't, don't feel bad. I was at the Waters Summit a couple weeks ago, if you guys are familiar with that. Somebody who I won't name, who's high up in state government, said, I wish there was an organization within state government that was coordinating resilience across all state government agencies. And we thought, I guess he hasn't heard of NCOR yet. So we still have some work to do on getting the word out. So I'm going to talk to you today about some of the, I guess, 2 projects in particular, but just kind of give you a sense of how we're embracing partnerships across the state to really try to move resilience forward. So just a couple years ago in 2020, we published as a state and with many partners, the North Carolina Climate Risk Assessment and Resilience Plan. And it called for many things. It's a very large plan if you've seen it. But the things I want to point out today is that it established the North Carolina Resilient Communities Program, which hosts RISE, which, as we know, Brian talked about yesterday. It also established the RCCP program, which we'll hear about from Mackenzie later today. Those are the acronyms. Hopefully we'll get through those, but those are the 2 communities that are working, or 2 programs we have in state government that are working with local governments and with communities on climate resilience. We also have, as a result of the plan, convened a dedicated interagency resilience team. So this is made up of at least 1, usually more, representative from each cabinet agency in state government to be the climate resilience lead for that agency. And so we all get together once a month and we talk about what our different agencies are doing. So that's cross-agency collaboration, communication, and can result in better programs, better funding opportunities. So just having a place for that communication really helps. And the Climate Risk Assessment and Resilience Plan also called for an online toolbox of sorts to try to aggregate all the climate data and climate resources that exist across North Carolina. So today, I'm really going to talk about these last 2 things. The Interagency Resilience Team, which is producing annual agency resilience reports in combination with lots of partners. You'll hear me say that over and over. And then we'll talk about this online toolbox idea. So first, the toolbox. So this does not exist yet. Right now, we're calling it the North Carolina Climate Resilience Clearinghouse. This is a brainchild of a lot of people, and it was initially led by Jacob. And the resilience plan called for it. The Natural and Working Lands Action Plan also called for a toolbox to aggregate natural and working land solutions and resources. And then the Coastal Resilience Community was saying, we need a website to aggregate all these resources because they're just all over the place. And so we said, let's do one site for the whole state to aggregate all the data that's out there, all of the case studies, all of the climate solutions that might work specifically in North Carolina. And so for those of you who have been in this field for a while of climate resilience and adaptation, you know that these already exist, these types of websites. There's national tools, there's a few state level tools, but I think in my experience and in talking to others, I think it's really helpful to have a state specific tool, because I think when you have local governments who are unfamiliar with the climate resilience field, they're not educated in this field. They're worried about the streets and the sewers and the day-to-day stuff of a local government. And so to have one place specific to North Carolina is a little less overwhelming and it's more specific. And we're going to go ahead and tease everything out that's not relevant to them. So we're really excited about this project. So it's being jointly led by the Department of Environmental Quality and by NCOR, the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency, with a ton of partners, probably a bunch of whom I've forgotten here. So this is truly a partnership effort. We have a steering committee that's guiding it, and we received funding from the U.S. Climate Alliance to kind of help get us started on the initial stages. So the project is in the works. So the first thing that we did as we kind of joined together and we started fleshing out what it is we want to do, we decided to figure out, well, what is it exactly that we want to see? And so what we want to see is just a resource hub, an online website. We wanted to have the latest and most authoritative information on climate change that's specific to North Carolina. And we want a site that cuts down on the frustration of finding resources. And I know there's many of you in this room who have created tools that are serving North Carolina really well. And you want to be able to get them out to more people. And so hopefully this site will help with that. Our target audience is the local decision makers, many of whom we're missing in this room today, but we'll work on that. The councils of government, I think, will get a lot out of this tool. State government staff, I think, even will. We need a place to aggregate all of our tools in the same way that other folks do. And we also want to make sure it's useful to the organizations and the for-profit companies that are trying to implement the solutions. So I think this also can be useful in universities and in the general public. So before I worked in North Carolina, I was working in Indiana, and we created a site like this. And what we saw was that, you know, the regular resident, sometimes often retired resident, would go to our state resilience site. They would print out a bunch of information, and then they'd go meet with their mayor. And so we were kind of arming them with that information to educate their mayor. So it wasn't just us that had to do that all the time. You know, it could be everybody trying to help, and because everybody wants to pitch in. Maybe not everybody, but you know, there are a lot of people that are trying to figure out how to help. We think we can do this by next fall. So hope and pray with us. All right, so I said we had a little bit of funding. We hired a really great consultant who was able to really help us get out there and talk to stakeholders. We did some stakeholder interviews. We looked at a bunch of existing climate change resilience websites, whether nationally or at the state level. There are some really great tools even coming out of NOAA at the federal level right now that I think that we can use those resources and bring them in. And so, you know, we talked to, I think, maybe 50 people just in one, like kind of very small, you know, 1 to 3 person focus groups, and tried to figure out what would be useful for our residents here. And so then we came up with an idea of what we might want. And I think one of our goals for this site is really to center diversity, equity, and inclusion. We don't want there to just be one tab in the navigation. We said, here's where you get all your diversity stuff. Instead, we want it to be really integrated throughout to show how can we protect our most vulnerable residents first and foremost as we're doing this work. All right, so here's our vision. Right now it's a bunch of words on a screen. We do have some kind of general kind of frameworks here, but I decided not to show them because they're pretty long. But we're starting to kind of sketch out what might be on each page and what might be useful and what's a way for, like, for example, there are a lot of mapping portals out there, but you really have to be kind of adept and maybe even almost a GIS user or a GIS user to be able to use them. So we want to make a mapping platform that's really accessible to the everyday user, to overlay the social vulnerability data with where the floodplain might be, to really make all of this information accessible. I think a lot of the ideas we heard from folks is to have a jobs board, a networking portal to figure out who does what. We hear that a lot in state government. We can't even figure out who does what across agencies, but we're getting better. And have an actions database. So what are the solutions that I can pull in? What are my options? So we want to make it available in Spanish as well. That's one of our goals. So, but I'd love to hear your ideas too, if you guys have strong opinions or thoughts about how we could make this work. Okay, on to my second topic. So state government, we want to be, with our resilience work, we want to be transparent. And so through some executive orders and through Executive Order 80, in fact, and through Executive Order 246, which was new as of January, transformation to a clean, equitable economy, and through the resilience plan, we are now coordinating report outs across agencies for these 3 documents that you see on the screen. And so it used to be that we would, well, the last one is new, but for the first 2, each agency would report out separately, but there's so much overlap. So now we're coordinating this. And so every October, every cabinet agency is required to report out on what they are doing to address climate change through internally and externally in the way that their agency, their cabinet mission works with the public. So those are available. If you go to the, I should have probably put a link up here, but I did not. Those are available on the Department of Environmental Quality's Climate Risk Assessment and Resilience Plan webpage. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, they're listed there. You can see past reports as well as present reports. So that's really helpful. And we coordinate these reports through the interagency resilience team. And we have these monthly meetings. Through these monthly meetings, I think we are developing resilience leadership within each agency. There's sort of cross-contamination of education across these state agencies. Department of Environmental Quality, even the North Carolina Division of Emergency Management, even NCORE. This is almost our day-to-day work, right? Like we know this climate resilience, adaptation, environmental protection stuff, but there are other agencies that are still figuring it out. And some of them are just doing incredibly well at this. It's very, very impressive. So here's everybody who participates. So you can see all the cabinet agencies down there at the bottom. The Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services is not required to participate, but they do because they want to. And the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission also participates. And so we're all getting together on a monthly basis and talking about how we can, what we're already doing to make the state more resilient and what else we could be doing and what are our gaps. And so a lot of those conversations have resulted in new policies. And so one example of that is the recent policy from I think it was Executive Order 266 that was to update the North Carolina Uniform Floodplain Management Policy. So I'll move this over here. So quickly, our vision is not to have that happen. That's the best image I could come up with for vision for this. But yeah, so my point here is really just that there are a lot of agencies that we wouldn't expect to be working on climate change that are working on climate change in North Carolina. So Department of Administration. So they're the department that's responsible for maintaining the buildings that state government owns and builds and maintains. So through this North Carolina Uniform Floodplain Management Policy for state construction, we are, so the last time this was updated was in 1990. So this is the policy that makes sure that we're not building things in the floodplain. So it's a good thing to update that. And they expect it'll be done within 18 months. So probably a little less than that now that the policy came out a few months ago. So that's happening. DIT, Department of Information Technology. I would normally think of that as a department who is just making sure my computer works when I get there. But they're doing way more than that. They're working with local governments to make sure they have resilience and adaptation plans or what is their resilience plan for when the power goes out, for example. They're also meeting with local governments one-on-one just to brainstorm what might happen to their IT departments with different hazards that are coming their way. So they're really thinking about these things. Department of Transportation is really a leader across the country in climate adaptation and resilience. It's incredible what they're doing. They have done so many vulnerability assessments. They're really thinking about roadway washouts during extreme rainfall and how that can really impact emergency response. The number of tools they're developing alone is a reason to create a resilience clearinghouse, I think. So lots of things happening there. I think I'll stop here, but hopefully that gives you a sense of what's happening in state government, because I know we don't talk about it a lot. So hopefully this will be a quick update for you.
Thank you, Andrea. Next up we have, we're going to go to the next speakers. We have Mackenzie, Todd, and Krista Early from the North Carolina Division of Coastal Management, and they are located in Morehead City. Oops, sorry. Yes, or whichever you want. Here.
Okay, well, hi, everybody. So my name is Krista Early.
Hey, and I'm Mackenzie Todd, the Coastal Resilience Specialist.
And so we both work for North Carolina's Division of Coastal Management. All right, so the Division of Coastal Management, or DCM, manages our state's coastal areas as well as the public trust resources in the 20 coastal counties of North Carolina. The division oversees the Coastal Management, the Coastal Area Management Act, or CAMA, the Dredge and Fill Law, and the rules and policies of the Coastal Resources Commission, or the CRC. We are responsible for several programs, including permitting, land use planning oversight, coastal policy, and numerous grant programs. The Division of Coastal Management, in partnership with NCOR and others, designed and launched the Resilient Coastal Communities Program, or the RCCP, in September of 2020. When the RCCP was created, we looked at what other states like Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Florida, and Colorado had been doing regarding community resiliency and borrowed elements to come up with a program that would specifically provide assistance to our communities and the specific resiliency issues that they face. So unlike NCOR, that has a statewide jurisdiction, the division has been charged with the jurisdiction of only the 20 CAMA counties. Because we have the responsibility to manage the state's coastal resources, as well as the waters that are held in public trust, it means that our programs only extend that far. This means that the counties, municipalities, and local governments that exist along our coast within the 20 CAMA counties can apply for the RCCP. We have all seen how devastating the impacts of flooding and other coastal hazards have been on our community and our economy. Continuous coastal development and climate change only amplify these risks and exacerbate the several barriers that are in place, like economic constraints. Building resilience to natural hazards is vital for our communities to maintain their quality of life, community growth, and their environmental resources. This is where the RCCP comes in. Our program aims to help communities plan and implement equitable resiliency projects to better weather the many coastal risks and vulnerabilities. So the North Carolina RCCP is an incentive-based program that funds local governments and helps them implement a community-driven process for setting coastal resilience goals, assessing existing and needed local capacity, and identifying and prioritizing projects that enhance community resiliency to coastal hazards. The communities that participate will walk through a process which leads to the development of shovel-ready projects. It provides funding to local governments to help overcome barriers in coastal resiliency and adaptation planning. It also boosts local government capacity and supports a proactive, sustainable, and equitable approach to coastal resilience planning and project implementation. Our program actually consists of 4 different phases. Mackenzie is going to discuss the 4 phases in more detail a little bit later on, but they are the community engagement and risk assessment phase, the project identification and prioritization phase, the engineering and design phase, and the implementation phase. We are currently working through the first round of the entire RCCP program, and our partners have been incredibly helpful with that process. So the Resilient Coastal Communities Program is funded through a disaster recovery appropriation from the North Carolina State Legislature and an emergency coastal resilient grant from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. We've also received funding from NOAA as well as funding from NCOR. So now I'm going to pass it over to Mackenzie Todd, who is our resiliency specialist, to explain our program in more detail and discuss a case study of what some of our partnerships have actually been able to produce through this program.
Hey, everybody. Let's talk numbers. Okay, so our program has talked to probably over 200 people on the ground specifically about resilience. And I've had the pleasure of meeting a majority of those folks. And it's been very rewarding, as a lot of them are just now really having these conversations, these typical conversations of, their homes are flooding and what are we going to do about it? Second, we've leveraged about $1.35 million in state funds to bring in $1.62 million in federal funds, and then another $550,000 for the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And a lot of that was due to our boss, Tancred Miller, took a lot of initiative in getting that funding. We also received $1.15 million and 3 full-time employee positions from the North Carolina General Assembly. So me and Krista are very thankful for that. We currently have a total of about $500,000 for phase 4, which is a construction phase. And we know that's not going to fund construction for every coastal community, but initially, when developing this program, we're hoping to focus more on the planning and the community engagement and really developing a portfolio of projects first instead of just jumping to construction. And we're hoping that this puts the communities in a position where they can be ready and competitive to apply for all those other sources of funding that are coming down the pipeline. So next, DCM staff and our program partners, most of them here at the table, wrote the program planning handbook. And within that handbook, it is basically a guiding document through the first 2 phases of the program. So the steps are outlined, and then there are existing tools and resources incorporated throughout to kind of help the contractors and the communities get through that process, because it's never been done before. So that gave some kind of guidance for this first round. And then we also produced 2 separate applications for this first round. There was an application that went out for communities to apply, and then there was an application process for the contractors to apply for the first 2 phases. So as Krista mentioned, there are 4 phases to the RCCP. I will go into more detail here in a second, but as she said, phase 1 is really starting with that community engagement, getting on the ground. And then looking at your critical assets and doing that risk and vulnerability assessment. Then we have them move into the project IDing and prioritization phase, and then getting them to the engineering and design. So getting one of those projects to an engineered site plan, and then hopefully phase 4, getting that project constructed. So for the first round of phases 1 and 2, we received approximately 30 applications representing 32 coastal communities. We had Topsail Beach, North Topsail Beach, and Surf City apply together, which we found really interesting, and it was actually a pretty good experience. I heard from them, hopefully. We reviewed those applications with our program partners back in 2020, 2021. And we scored them based on a couple different criteria. So we were looking at their level of risk exposure to their vulnerable populations and their critical assets. And by critical assets, that could mean anything. Their roads, their infrastructure, hospitals, schools, anything that they found important. We left that up to them to decide what those were. Their economic status and need, and then their internal capacity. A lot of our coastal towns really only have 1 or 2 staff people working. So there's a lot of need out there. So 26 communities were ultimately selected for this first round. So there's a range of communities. We had 18 municipalities and 8 counties participate. And then for the contractors, we had 20 applications come in, and we selected 10 contractors to provide that technical assistance to the 26 communities. And looking at those contractor applications, we were looking for their experience in resilience planning, how they do community engagement, if they had any experience in nature-based solutions, and then hopefully any relevant work in North Carolina coastal region. So once we had our 26 communities and our 10 contractors, we matched them together. We did that based on either a community's request or their geographic locations, or kind of took the skills that a contractor had to a need that a community needed, whether it was transportation or things like that. So we then contracted directly with those contracting firms to provide that technical assistance. So it took the procurement burden off the communities, which we heard was very beneficial for them. So phase 1, I'll go into a little more detail here. This is what we really were working on over the past year. And that photo is from the town of Hertford. They had a very engaging community action team. So that first step is to develop that community action team. So the idea there is that that team is going to actively participate in and inform the process and really champion the effort. And if you guys were in a session yesterday, we were really talking about how that's needed, community champions to really keep that momentum going. Members within that can include really anyone. We had locality staff, emergency management, GIS, elected officials. There were planning board members, business owners, faith leaders, really just anyone who wanted to get into this process. So the second step is to set their visions and goals. So where do they want to go from here? And where do they see their community in the next 5, 10, 20 years? So we ask them to set specific measurable goals to help them identify steps that can be taken to achieve that vision. So as Sarah mentioned, we have them look at the triple bottom line approach, which goes beyond traditional hazard mitigation and looks more holistically at their social, environmental, and economic factors. So the third step is to review their existing plans and efforts. As you guys know, communities have a ton of work that's already been done, and we don't want to reinvent the wheel. And we want to make sure we're promoting integration, like as Jacob was talking about. So there's a lot of plans and initiatives that communities have that you can pull from and then add on to. Once they do that, we ask that they develop a community engagement strategy. So how are they going to get out there and talk about these issues? And as we all know, getting from resilience planning to action requires jointly created ideas. It requires buy-in and commitment from a diverse group of stakeholders. So this was a pretty huge step. The fifth step, we asked them to identify and map those critical assets and their natural infrastructure to then include within the risk and vulnerability assessment, which is the last step. So that step evaluates their risks to those vulnerable populations and their critical assets from a number of hazards. So we asked them to look at flooding, specifically rainfall, tidal, and riverine. We asked them to look at storm surge, sea level rise, and then other locally relevant hazards. So some looked at erosion and some looked at wind too. So phase 2, this was what the communities really liked. This was an exciting phase. So this phase includes the project identification and prioritization. So communities in this phase develop a portfolio of those projects or actions or policies they want to move forward with that are going to reduce their exposure and their sensitivity to those identified hazards and hopefully strengthen their adaptive capacity of those assets and those vulnerable populations. We then had them consolidate all of those ideas into at least 5 top priority projects to kind of help them focus moving forward with future grant opportunities, and then they knew where the community was in terms of prioritization. So once they go through those 2 phases, they get something called a resilience strategy, which is a combination of all of those deliverables I was just speaking about. So while we know this is not meant to be a comprehensive resilience plan, we're hoping that this can be used maybe later to build on for a comprehensive plan, or it can be put into existing plans or ordinances. And we're hoping having a planning document like this provides the community a clarity of purpose, attracts funding that they went through this process, and then providing them a more direct path to implementation. So lessons learned. They were our guinea pigs, so there was a lot to learn this first round. But on the positives, we surveyed all 26 communities and the contractors, and our program partners helped us with those questions. And in terms of what their experiences were and how we can improve for the next round. But in terms of positives, there was a majority of them that said that this was difficult moving from hazard mitigation planning into more resilience planning conversations, but most of them enjoyed that, and it kind of helped them, think in a different way. There were a handful of our contractors that created templates and story maps and things different from the handbook, which were really creative and we're hoping to use in the future as templates. And we also heard that the communities really liked the community action teams, and they're going to keep using them in the future for future decisions and grant opportunities. In terms of things that we're hoping to improve, so we had 8 counties participating, but for the next time, we're probably going to need them to specify an area of interest because our budget and a countywide assessment and community engagement was very challenging. Also, we're hoping that our office can be more hands-on next time in the CAT development phase because there were some community action teams that were missing really essential folks. And during that time, it was pretty limited staff on our end. So now we've got those 3 full-time positions, and we should be able to be more hands-on next time in making those connections. We're also hoping to provide more training materials for the next round now that we've kind of seen how it works. Let's see, we also think it's important to add a next step section to our planning handbook, and we're also making huge edits to that thanks to our program partners are helping me with that. Because you finish phases 1 and 2 and then we just don't want to say see ya. There needs to be some next steps, like what other plans need to be looked at, what feasibility studies need to be done. And then finally, we're working on a technical appendix, which is going to have more resources, and then hopefully those templates and things that I was talking about that give them more of an idea of what a community engagement strategy should even look like, or what a risk and vulnerability assessment should look like. So next steps, where are we at right now? So we're currently in phase 3, which is engineering and design. We just recently funded 20 projects for a total of $1.12 million. So 20 of those communities are hopefully going to get those projects identified in phase 2 through the engineering and design phase. And like I said, we're currently editing the planning handbook to make that more robust and easier to use. And then also, we're going to do a second round of those first 2 phases, and we're hoping to have those applications out here in the next few weeks, and then that will run next year. And then phase 4, which is the carrot that all the communities are hopefully, they want to get that construction going. So that period will probably begin next year. So we're going to have kind of a lot of moving things at once, but that's what keeps it exciting. So in terms of those awards, I know that's a lot. It was hard. I wanted to fit it all on one screen, but a majority of our first round of communities applied and received funding for phase 3. So that was the whole idea. So we are excited to see where these go. We have contracted with all those communities, and now that they have a contract with us, they can post their RFPs, hire a contractor, and get that work done. And then once they have that, then they can move on to construction money. So in terms of, we've been talking about partnerships today, I just wanted to showcase an example that we found very beneficial this first round. So as I mentioned, we had partnered the contractors with the communities, but we also partnered a contractor with a COG, the Mideast Commission. We only did that with these 2. I guess it was kind of like an experiment. So RK&K brought a lot of technical expertise to the table. They are very organized. They've done this kind of work before. And then the Mideast Commission had those already local relationships with those communities. So they worked with Aurora, Belhaven, Beaufort County, and the city of Washington. And those folks already knew Jamie Heath, who was the lead of the Mideast Commission. So that kind of already built that trust. It wasn't just a contracting firm coming in from a place they don't know, telling them what they need to do. And they worked very well together. That did not require any state, intervention. We didn't have to do any crisis management. There wasn't, they really worked together well. And in the future, we're probably going to try to get the COGs more involved that way. And they also really just found it beneficial. And then I just want to wrap it up by thanking our partners as we're talking about partnerships today. This program would not be where it is without our partners. And like I said, most of them sitting here at this table have helped me in times of need and stress. And as they've all said, working together has been a real pleasure. So that's it.
And I want to say thank you to Mackenzie because she has worked so hard on the RCCP over the last year, and it would not be where it is without her. So I want to give her thanks too. Next up, we have Lora Eddy from the Nature Conservancy. And I think we're right on time.
All right, good morning. So I'm a coastal geologist and I work as the conservation and resilience specialist for the North Carolina chapter of the Nature Conservancy. Just to get a little background about me, I've spent my career working with coastal communities in Florida, Oregon, Washington State, and now North Carolina on environmental permitting, regulation, community planning, and stormwater topics. Now, primarily, my work is focused on helping communities adapt to climate impacts on the coast. Want to kind of, since I'm the only non-governmental organization here, introduce who we are at the Nature Conservancy. We're a global conservation organization dedicated to conserving the lands and waters on which all life depends. We were started in 1951 with our North Carolina chapter established in 1977. So we're a nonprofit. We are funded by members, donors, and grants. And in North Carolina, we have helped protect over 700,000 acres of land. And we do this with our core values in partnership with businesses, communities, and governments. This work could not get done otherwise. We are also guided by science to find these innovative solutions for people and nature. So that's who we are, and how we became a part of this kind of resource for planning for resilience. I kind of want to give you a background and a story around our efforts to incorporate climate into the work that we do. And this started back in the early 2000s. And on the screen here, you can see a picture. This is Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge. And we were experiencing and seeing the impact of climate change has had on Earth's biodiversity, but really what we were seeing on the ground was the impact to the lands that we love and we protected. And the organization at that time recognized that we really had to start that difficult conversation. So this is a little bit ahead of where the state of North Carolina is. So that's where we're bringing the value to this conversation and supporting these partners up here at the state level who are just starting these conversations. When we took a deep look at that and tried to figure out how we were going to tackle this and incorporate this into our work, we recognized that we needed to go back into the core values of the organization, focusing on the tools and science that we had to guide us on dealing with climate in these areas and within our mission. And then once we had those tools and the science around climate and how that was going to impact the lands that we work on and the restoration and the protection work that we do, we looked at integrating that into our planning and partnerships. And you can see this very similarly in what the state is doing around resilience here. Then after that, we took that information and we really have baked that into all of our work. So while we continue to protect lands and waters, we are keeping that lens of climate around the work that we do. And so to give you kind of a taste of what that means on action, which is kind of where North Carolina is at this community level and the state level, and how do we get there and how do we do this? I want to kind of cover some of those buckets that we divided this huge, massive challenge of climate into manageable actions and areas that we could work. One of those kind of solutions or action buckets that we put our work in was around management. What kind of management action can we take within the work that we do? Another one was around mitigation, thinking about, and of course, being the Nature Conservancy, these are all natural kind of actions that we're going to be focusing on around mitigation for carbon and what kind of natural systems can do to mitigate that impact of carbon in the system. And then our last one was around this adaptation and resilience, knowing that we have lands that we're interested in fostering and stewarding, and how can we feed the information and the work that we do back into those conversations that are happening at the intersection of our land and the communities that are approaching these challenges. So to give you a little background on where we started with this management, this was 2009. First was focusing on our most vulnerable areas. And for our planning region, the office that I'm located in out in Nags Head Woods, the first area that we focused on was Alligator River National Wildlife Refuge. Here, we partnered with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. What we were seeing on the ground as far as the impacts to climate we are seeing saltwater intrusion. And this was happening because this great habitat that we worked so hard to protect in the past had been used for other purposes. They had a ditching system and roads to access this area for previous land uses. And what we are seeing is that provided a conduit for saltwater intrusion into this important habitat that we had strived to protect. And so we were seeing that rapid habitat change happening on the ground in front of our eyes, seeing ghost forests appear with saltwater intrusion, killing off maybe the important cypress trees that we were interested in keeping for that ecosystem. And lastly, we were seeing, this was along the fringing border of the Albemarle Sound, we were seeing excessive accelerated erosion from this increased impact from climate on frequency and severity of storms. And so we were just seeing our habitat and our special place lost. So we looked at what were the management actions we could take, steps on the ground to address this. And we looked at restoring hydrology by constructing a water control structure in these existing ditches, even plugging the ditch at the most shoreline location to keep the fresh water in there and allow that to mitigate the impact of saltwater intrusion. Our second step was another management action along the shoreline, again, focusing on where our work is, naturally resilient efforts by using oyster reefs to attenuate the wave energy that we were seeing that was accelerating that shoreline erosion. And then finally, we were ready to embrace this change. We said, okay, we know this is our most vulnerable site. We're going to have some change here. And we transitioned, or we encouraged that transition of the habitat by establishing vegetative plantings that were either flood resilient or salt tolerant. And so that was our first management approach. What we recognized here was that the pace of what we were seeing on the ground was actually more difficult to keep up with than we realized, even with these approaches. And so we've kind of transitioned our thought as we're dealing with how do we adapt to this system and this new reality of the future, to move inward and think about our lands in the intercoastal areas that are upland and not going to be as rapidly impacted by climate. So the next bucket that we kind of looked at for how do we break down our actions to address climate was around mitigation. And we stuck to our core activities around restoration and looked at this opportunity again in partnership with U.S. Fish and Wildlife in 2014 to launch our first carbon project. This was at Poquoson Lakes National Wildlife Refuge, and really our first primary goal here when we were looking at this project was to improve the habitat and prevent wildfires by restoring this area that had been previously ditched and drained due to past land activities. But what the climate angle here was this concept of getting carbon credits for that work. It's kind of co-aligning that effort of what we're doing for our mission for restoring and managing our lands, but also thinking about climate in the actions that we were taking here. And here, peat soils in this certain ecosystem and habitat are a high carbon rich and organic resource and can be a significant carbon sink. At the in the state that they were, in the drain state, they were emitting a lot of carbon, but by restoring this habitat and re-wetting these peat soils, we were able to demonstrate that there was a carbon accounting methodology, there was a net decrease of carbon emissions, and we could try to register this effort with the American Carbon Registry and get it qualified for carbon credit accounting. The bonus that we've seen with all this work, that especially at this project, where we are seeing that these have effects during storm events to help delay peak flow discharges to your downstream areas, which is providing that community and that resilience benefit for flooding. Like you're enabling those areas that are maybe impacted for an extreme event with surge to not then have that compounding rainfall and discharge that's coming downstream so quickly. So those were our efforts, and what we learned from doing this work was the partnership got us there. We had a lot of opportunity when we brought in our partners to seek successful funding, and when we did have success, like this one carbon mitigation project, we were able to scale that and replicate it beyond and take that lesson learned and be successful in other places. And so we've taken that to other areas and brought in new partners to execute this work. Finally, in 2016, when I was brought on, we looked at that third bucket on adaptation and how we might take these experiences and this knowledge of, using the natural system, restoring it, meeting some of those issues that we needed to meet for communities around climate, but providing them those, kind of technical expertise and knowledge. And we brought our Coastal Resilience program to North Carolina, which is consisting of this kind of a phased approach of looking at risk and vulnerability, identifying the gap maybe that's existing on the technical expertise or data, and providing and serving that up through this web-based mapping portal. So we've developed this tool, and we've worked with various academics or existing data and research that we had and knowledge to provide an accessible tool to the community level. But we weren't just doing that by ourselves in a vacuum. We actually approached the communities and asked them what would be the most helpful resource to enable them to execute these kind of natural solutions on the ground. And while we were doing this, and I'm being the only expert from the Nature Conservancy, I'm filtering in all the information and expertise from my colleagues on the work that we've done here, and this is really where I focus. We noticed that we really needed to kind of not only take that on the ground approach, but also look at what other efforts can we do to scale this beyond that on the ground work in places that we care about. And so we really saw that we needed to focus on state level policy and programmatic support, providing the lessons that we've learned on how do we integrate climate into the work that we do, and taking that to other practitioners, other agencies and organizations. So this is the kind of the recipe we followed when we were like leading on the ground to ensure that we weren't providing expertise in areas that we maybe didn't have knowledge. We wanted to use existing relationships, so we really focused the beginning of our work in Dare, Hyde, Currituck communities, again, tailoring what information they needed and what was helpful to what their experiences and needs were. And we really stuck to where we can provide expertise and knowledge. Of course, we can provide the knowledge and expertise around how difficult the conversation is, how actions that use natural systems are effective in just not only adaptation, but also carbon and mitigation. And so we really stuck to that recipe. And then I'm going to skip this. Yes, and what we were doing, okay, well, I'm just gonna skip to still challenging. Okay, so as far as working with the Resilient Coastal Communities Program and these great partners up here, what we've seen that communities are still struggling to have a kind of a comprehensive resilience approach. Maybe they have a tangible structural project that they can address, but maybe they don't know where those non-structural policy options are that could improve their resiliency. Another thing that I want to kind of say is still challenging is that even if we're going to be serving up these options, or as we maybe call solutions to deal with climate, we also have to recognize that there are limits on it. And we've recognized that in some of our favorite places, and having to accept and acknowledge that we will have to let some of these areas go or transition completely. And then I think there are some difficult choices ahead. These challenges aren't new. The messaging on the ground, talking to these communities, we're working on trying to meet them where they are, but also understanding that they've been dealing with these issues, but they're not really understanding maybe at some points how rapidly the change is coming, and helping them kind of have those difficult conversations and guide them through the process. While there's a lot of changes, I want to just point out that the best part of the work that we've done together is that we're doing it together. And we're not just tackling these climate challenges alone. We're actually working across these different geographies, disciplines, and governmental jurisdictions to bring these new ideas and ways to address these challenges and amplify our experts and our information and working together. All right, and I'm going to stop there.
All right, y'all, we're going to start with the question and answer session so that we can go to our lunch break soon. So I'm sure y'all have lots of great questions, but I was going to start off with one that I wanted to ask Jacob and maybe Mackenzie. So we heard a lot about the chip from Secretary Beiser yesterday, and then a lot from Jacob today, and thinking about how we can incorporate the chip into other state plans. Jacob or Mackenzie, can you talk a little bit about the process of how the chip is being incorporated into programs like the RCCP, and maybe how the latest amendment has helped with that process? Yep.
I guess I'll take this one. Yeah, so I don't know if I mentioned it or not, but this is somewhat of a novel approach, because the 2021 CHIP amendment was the first iteration that we were actually able to include climate change impacts and resilience measures. For those that have been around state government for a while, there was quite a few of those years where you couldn't even say climate change or sea level rise, to the point of having to look over your shoulder. So it was really a breath of fresh air just to be able to incorporate that that science and body of research that had been going on at the academic level for a while, and have the state finally catch up to that. So having said that, when we got done with the CHIP amendment, again, we tried to make the recommendations actionable and work with the other processes that were going on with the resilience plan, natural working lands plan. But once we got to the implementation phase, we were like, how can we incorporate this into these existing efforts? And it really just came back, I feel like, the whole conversation to that collaboration and partnership, reaching out with the network of individuals we have, and working with Mackenzie and RCCP group to say, how can we incorporate some of these, whether it's marsh migration or these other recommendations in the CHIP that align with what they're doing in these communities, to where you're just accounting for and at least making people aware that there are these other existing plans that have very similar recommendations. So how can we knock out multiple birds with one stone? So that was kind of the genesis of it. And that's really just happened over the last year, because again, it's kind of a new process for it. But because we had built those partnerships and collaborations over the years, it was just kind of hopping right in to include the actions. It wasn't catching people up. It was just, going to work on it.
And I'll just add to what Jacob said in terms of the RCCP. Jacob's been great at, bringing these ideas to us, and myself and Sarah and a few of our partners sat down and we went through all of the priority actions of the CHIP and pulled out ones related to resilience. And we're going to be incorporating those in the update to the planning handbook, and just moving forward with the communities, making sure they're aware of the CHIP and where the state's priorities are.
And Jacob, how can you get a CHIP sticker if you want one?
I have 3 left, but you can email me. I have more in my office. I'd be happy to send you one, and they're pretty awesome.
All All right, thank you guys. Let's open it up to the audience. Does anybody have a question they would like to ask? All right, and we have to either have you talk into the mic so that the Zoom audience can hear, or we're going to repeat it. So I think Kayla's going to walk around with the mic.
Hi, thanks for the great presentations. My question is about the development of the project portfolios for the RCCP. How did you pick which projects, or what was the selection process for including projects in those portfolios? Was it contractors making the decisions, or community members, or was there some back and forth there?
That is a great question. Each community did a little bit differently. We didn't give them a set of rules of how they had to prioritize. We gave them some examples, like the state bleed criteria, and just some tools to help them in terms of how to prioritize projects. We more just left it in their hands, though, to, once they had realized what their critical assets really were and what those hazards were, it kind of helped develop where their priorities needed to be. And the contractors were there to offer that technical assistance with coming up with project ideas. And a lot of them already had existing, ideas and other plans, but just hadn't been able to move forward on them. So they were able to take some of those and redesign them a little bit. But that is something we're hoping in the future we can maybe provide more guidance on how to do that, because it's really hard to, look at, their hospital that floods every time a storm comes, and what are they going to do about it? I'm certainly not an engineering expert. I don't know what the exact solution is going to be. So if you have any ideas on how to really do that, let me know.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, I enjoyed the presentations. Ken Holanich at Center for Marine Science, UNCW. Question, I think mainly for Andrea, but maybe all of you can address it. With the clearinghouse, have you thought about forward-looking models and thinking not just about database, but being able to model and predict?
We have, and thank you for asking that. I should have clarified that earlier. We really want to make sure that there are climate projections that are easily available to users across the state. And I think we're still working this out, but one of the ideas that we've heard so far is to have it so a page where you can type in your city, town, or county and see the exact data that's projected based on varying scenarios. So you can see like the sort of scenario, have the exact data for the scenario planning. And I think for those of us that work with this data day in and day out, those projections, we know that the exact number doesn't really matter. And in many cases, maybe for sea level rise, it does. And maybe even for temperature projections, it does. But either way, but sometimes you need that data to justify the work being done. And so if the more local it is, I think the stronger the case is when you're arguing at a local level, because I think it's easy to say, oh, well, that data is for the whole state. We're not the whole state. We're unique, and everybody feels unique. And so if you provide them with that climate projection data, it's very specific to them, then they have some arguments to make change in their community. So yes, I hope that we can include that.
Hi, I'm Andrea Mackenzie. I'm a graduate student at the Duke Nicholas School of the Environment. It sounds like it's a really exciting time to be in North Carolina doing this work, but I was wondering if there's any conversations or movement toward integrating carbon mitigation strategies into this resilience work, whether that's sinks or, reducing emissions.
Jacob, you want to start?
Yeah, I'll just say one thing. So the clearinghouse is also going to be, so the Natural Working Lands Action Plan and the Resilience Plan of 2020 both called for similar toolboxes. So we kind of merged those. So it's going to be also a clearinghouse of natural working lands and that kind of carbon mitigation information. So again, with the clearinghouse, we're not talking about creating or housing a ton of data sets. It's really a place to have a location to be able to find those tools that you need and have that information. So from that perspective, it is being addressed.
Do you want to add anything, Andrea or Lora?
You want me to add? Okay, all right. So as I mentioned in kind of my presentation on the work that we've done on action on the ground, a lot of the projects that are based around ecosystem resilience or natural habitats restoration do provide that carbon benefit, which is why the state has utilized our experience and is bringing that into the work with the resilient coastal communities, with RISE, as far as providing a portfolio and providing the communities pressure or incentive to kind of incorporate that as an approach as well. Because yes, these projects, we get multiple benefits. Not only do we get ecosystem resilience, but we get carbon sequestration or mitigation along with them. So
Yeah, no, I'll add that, I mean, I think, as a field, we try to talk about interdisciplinary work, and yet I often see these silos of greenhouse gas mitigation and then climate resilience, and there's a lot of overlap there. And so even in I think, recently the state government in the past couple of years, we've been reporting out in one report on our greenhouse gas reduction activities and in another report on our climate resilience and adaptation activities. And so for the first time this year, just here in October, we combined those reports because there's so much overlap in them, and state agencies were complaining. They're like, we're just writing the same thing twice. So that's not efficient use of taxpayer dollars. So we combined that. But I think it's something we can all do a better job of is acknowledging when there's a project and maybe prioritizing projects that are also going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, because we know that's the first adaptation strategy, right? It's just to reduce our emissions. So we should be thinking about that first and foremost.
I think we had a.
I may or may not have been one of those people complaining to Andrea about duplicated reports.
I think we had a couple questions over here, so we'll take care of this cluster and then we'll take additional hands.
Hi, I'm Carl Dudman. I'm a PhD anthropology student from the UK. Thanks so much. I feel like I could ask 412 questions about RCCP, but I'll try to stick to one. So I was really interested in this idea of community action teams, and I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about how those get made, how involved you are in sort of curating them. Do you just let the community sort of decide? Or do you try to stop sort of busybodies just muscling in and taking over? And I know I'm always banging on about unincorporated communities, but just generally speaking, in contexts where you have a lot of different views and opinions, and there's no sort of clear way of organizing those, or no sort of hierarchy or anything like that. I mean, how would you go about approaching that? So that's like for RCCP people, but anyone who's sort of generally doing community solicitation, if you have a view, I'm really interested in that.
Sure, that's a really great question. And the development of a CAT, a community action team, was a pretty new idea to some of the communities. Obviously they have steering committees and things like that, but this was more of a charge in terms of resilience and championing, the whole effort of the RCCP. We offered them guidance in the handbook in terms of, who should be involved, how to make those connections, but we really left it up to them on who those people should be, and the contractors were there to kind of help with that. But the community knows who they have and who needs to be involved. But as I mentioned in the lessons learned, there was definitely gaps in some of those community action teams in areas of, talking about future conditions, natural infrastructure, transportation. So hopefully in the future, our office can make those connections for those communities that just don't have the capacity or know those folks. And luckily we had some of our partners on the community action team. So Lora and Sarah, they got to serve on some of those to help provide that expertise. But we definitely could have used more. And I don't know if you guys want to add to any of that.
Well, the other thing I wanted to add on the other part of your question around unincorporated areas and how do we address that. And so sometimes when you give a community the opportunity to kind of come up with how to address that, they do. And one of the groups that did apply, Dare County, actually focused in on Hatteras Island specifically, which is an unincorporated. It's not represented necessarily by organized governmental group. So they had their own way. And it was actually a really effective, breaking these into manageable buckets and actions. So it's like, it's just this overwhelming challenge. Like we can integrate it as, you were saying, or Sarah was saying, like IT, you know, even at the state level is thinking about how to deal with adaptation and resiliency, and, you know, a community can empower them to take these chances and look at it differently, and they can see that there's a leader in that unincorporated area that can take the ball and roll with it. And then if they just provide that background support from the internal staff at the county level, then they can make some actions and make some plans around what they needed to do, which was really interesting.
Yeah, and I'll just add one more thing. So I think Mackenzie is correct. We decided to really let the communities lead that process of developing their own CAT, because as Mackenzie said, the community knows who they have there and who needs to be a leader. But that, you know, broke down in a little bit in many places, because you know, some communities have more expertise that live in the communities than others. So for example, where I live in the town of Beaufort, we had Paula Gillikin, who's the Rachel Carson Reserve site manager, serve on our CAT team, which was great. So she's an expert in natural resource management, and she did that, you know, not as her job, but as a citizen. Well, there's many small coastal towns, I won't name them, in North Carolina that don't have a Paula Gillikin that lives there. So that's, you know, Beaufort is a special place and has that expertise. So we did see that there could be gaps just because, you know, a lot of small communities don't have all of that representation that might be needed on a CAT. So we're working with DCM to think about how do we help communities while also making sure that they're leading the process. But, you know, there's no one solution that fits all communities. So it's really trying to be flexible and think about how to fill those gaps.
And I'll just add one more thing when you're talking about, you know, people having so many different opinions and ideas on what they should do. As I mentioned, Topsail Island, so it's Topsail Beach, North Topsail Beach, and Surf City. The three of them came together as one unity. So they got one resilience strategy, you know, one report, and they wanted to stay together on that, have an island-wide approach. So they had one community action team, but with three different communities, three different priorities. And so, not to put you on the spot, one of the contractors with them is here. And some of those CAT meetings were a little chaotic, a little bit of herding cats. Everybody's got different priorities, but we could go back and look at some of their reports and learn a lot from that. A lot of that is up on our website now, the final products, those resilience strategies. And those are some things we can learn from, because ultimately they came to a conclusion, the three of them, and they have a portfolio of projects, and they applied for phase 3, and they got over $100,000 for an island-wide stormwater project. So it can be done. Lessons learned.
And to keep this going, I'll add, so for the RISE program, the other half of the Resilient Communities program, so this is a program that's working, we didn't talk about today because Brian talked about it yesterday, as we keep saying. So this is a program that's working at a regional scale. Instead of with one individual community, we're working across regions. So that's multi-county region. So in one case, I think we have 10 counties in one project. We're trying to get people across those 10 counties to work together to come up with projects that will help their region be more resilient to climate change. And to facilitate community engagement, we established a stakeholder partnership in each region. And we were a little bit more hand-holdy in that, and in that we came up with a recommended list of partner types, I should say, for each region, to make sure we were getting racial diversity and sector diversity and county by county diversity and everything we could think of to make it as representative as possible. And so we worked with our contractors, with our councils of governments in each region. And I think the important point here is that we also hired, we used our funding in partnership with the North Carolina Rural Center to hire a local facilitator from each region. And I think in 8 of the 9 regions, this was a Black person, and it was really great to have a person of color leading on the ground and facilitating those community conversations, because as we know, a lot of our government representatives are not Black or brown or of any other ethnicity. And so that was really important. But I think the lesson learned that we had was that, you know, like, we did an okay job of filling those gaps and filling out those diversity needs, but it was really hard to keep everybody engaged, because this was a massive project in which we had 9 stakeholder partnerships across the state, and many people were participating in multiple stakeholder partnerships. And this started in January, and so we were requiring people to attend Zoom meeting or virtual meetings every month, for an hour and a half, and it was too big and too long to keep everybody engaged actively. But we still had good participation, I think, across the regions.
I think we had a question back here and then maybe one up front.
Hi, I'm Evan Ferguson. I'm from Cape Hatteras Secondary School. I'm not sure if you guys can answer this, but I did hear someone say that that there are places that you're going to have to let go. And this is my community, some of the places. And my question is there talk at the state level of what we continue to allow to be built on and sell? We see a lot of people coming in with no knowledge about flooding in the Outer Banks, and they're buying all these pieces of property that the locals are like, wow, you're crazy. And so is there a point, are you guys talking about, okay, in this many years, this many feet away from the ocean, there's going to be a moratorium on sales in those places? Or is it just we are going to make as much money as we can for as long as we can?
Anybody want to take that one? Tancred Miller in the back.
I was
see
just
you.
gonna say.
There we go.
There we go. Thanks,
know.
boss.
I'm gonna have to talk to my lawyer.
I'm not going to take that question on directly, but I will say that one of the efforts in the past that has failed that maybe is going to get some more traction is a coastal hazards real estate disclosure that's been proposed in bills in the past and gets shot down pretty quickly by home builders and realtors. But maybe it's gaining some traction at the national level, and so maybe that's one part of that.
And maybe I'll add to just an interesting statistic that I've heard recently, that in North Carolina, for every one property that we're purchasing in the floodplain to move a homeowner or other business outside of the floodplain, there are 10 more buildings being built in the floodplain. So it's just a staggering statistic that we need a lot of help with this. But I think but thank you for asking the question. Either way, I know we don't have a good answer for you, but it's hard emotionally. I'll just recognize that for the room, because these are lands that we care about and that we've been living on and are built communities and families there. So it's just a really hard topic. But we're also facing we're in a challenging era with climate change. And so, eventually we'll have to make hard decisions, and hopefully we'll just do it as respectfully as we possibly can of the people's emotions and finances and ties. So.
And I'll add one more thing. I think it's not lost on any of us sitting up here that we go to work and do all this really great climate resilience work. And we work really hard, and our partnerships are really strong and all the great things we've told you. But a lot of us live in these coastal communities where development is rampant. Like I said, we have a growing resident population, and it's in my backyard. I see it every day. So it is, as Andrea said, it's really challenging right now. But I think, conferences like these, education outreach, it is really important. We need to think about who we're reaching, the information we want to share, that our messages are really clear and consistent. And we have to keep moving forward, because if we don't, it's going to be worse. Did somebody in this group say something about, maybe it was Carl, I can't remember, about we should have planted the trees 20 years ago? Okay, and I don't remember the exact quote, but the next best time to plant a tree is now. So that's what we're doing now, is we're planting the trees for the future.
And then Tancred, were you going to say something? Okay. No, I was just going to also acknowledge, from a local community perspective, as a previous local planner, it's really hard to get citizens engaged in land use decisions. And I would encourage everybody in the room. I mean, this is a very tough question. It's very emotionally driven. And we do recognize how charged It is, but I mean, it's more the reason that we should all be engaged at a local level in what happens with our land use planning and our decision making, and that if you're not, ask questions and find out. So I would just encourage you to plug in, I mean, not only you, but everybody in the room. And this is why we should be plugging into what's happening at local government levels, because decisions are happening. And, there seems to be apathy, I think, at a local level about, you have the same subsets of people that are engaged repetitively over and over again, but we need to figure out a way to reach people where they are and figure out what motivates them and how to get people in the room that currently aren't at the table. So it's lots of hard questions, no answers, but just an encouragement to plug in with your local governments who are making those decisions.
And I'll just add my apologies to the original question asker. Wasn't trying to make light of it. It's a very difficult subject, and I can't add a whole lot to what's already been said because it is such a difficult topic. But I think the common theme here is it's not going to be a top-down decision. It's going to come from communities, from participants like yourself who are engaged and who care and want to make a difference. So all the RCCP, all this stuff, all the RISE stuff, is really just to help support communities in making these types of decisions.
I think we got a question here, if you still have a question, and then we'll head this direction. I see your hand.
So my question is for Mackenzie and then possibly for any of the other groups. But my name is Ryan Mitchell. I'm with DRMP Engineering. And what are some ways for engineers and contractors to get involved in these, to understand what these project opportunities are, and as well as in the planning process, and kind of what does that look like? Is that getting involved in work groups or just how does that work?
Do you mean specifically for the RCCP? Yeah. Well, hi, it's nice to meet you. Definitely just coming to us and making these kind of conversations and connections so we know who's out there and, where the technical expertise is. If you're saying you're engineering, that's you're about to maybe be busy with phase 3. Those 20 communities are about to be posting RFPs for that work to be done. So if you ever have questions about that, you can always contact me or Krista or our team, and we can plug you with those communities. And if you want to see like the work that's been done so far and those communities that participated, like I said, those final products are on our website, and I can connect you with that, and your team can kind of look through and see maybe where you plug in best, and I can get you contact information for those communities. I don't know if that answers your question fully, but you can grab me after too, and we can.
Thanks. I want to return to the previous question because I think it was a good one and it is hard to answer. Valuation of land and valuation of things that are hard to value become very important. And somebody threw up, again, I think it might have been Andrea, threw up a chart with who was involved in this discussion. And there were some surprising groups that weren't involved. Labor was one, insurance was one. Why not insurance? Because that can really help drive some of this discussion about managed retreat and what's going on. So why aren't those groups involved with this?
Can I just clarify, not involved with what?
Well, so I forget who it was. Somebody threw up a chart and it showed who all was involved. But in terms of the question about the value of property, keeping building in floodplains and on coastal areas, it comes down to money, right? And so if insurance companies are unwilling or get told, they can't keep charging everybody when certain people build in the floodplain, that changes the equation. So it seems to me there should be more of those types of thought processes. Maybe I'm off base.
So some of the work the Nature Conservancy has done outside of just our on-the-ground protection and restoration has been with the insurance market. And so they are looking at incorporating the valuation of resiliency building efforts, incorporating, and there's a ton of like new tools out there. I can't even keep up with all the ones that are trying to get at those different audiences of the real estate or the the coastal development engine, that's having and conflicting with this, process of keeping us from putting our resources and our people in these risky places. But yeah, there is a lot of, they're thinking about it for sure. And we have reached out and tried to help them put that ecosystem, I hate that, ecosystem services valuation into their formulas. So it is happening. Unfortunately, and I know Florida will be one of our, our test case guinea pigs to see what happens in that market. I mean, I lived there and I left, but there is very limited options for the individual. And that also, I know Andrea's thinking about this, is the inequity then that also does create, because then when we have insurance leave these marketplaces, a lot of times it's the second-hand homeowners that can handle that, right? But then the individuals, the actual community of people who live there are left in the lurch and left vulnerable without a resource to reserve and to rescue them if there is a extreme event. So yeah, it is a very, very challenging problem. And I agree, they should be more involved. I just don't know that it's like at the government level trying to reach down to get the planning and the thought process and the conversation started.
Yeah, I just wanted to add from a community perspective, I think that communities who participate in the community rating system, or CRS, that's like a sister program to the NFIP program, communities get discounts on flood insurance based on your participation in activities. And so the more you do, the more discount you get for people in your community. But I think that communities who participate in the CRS program are engaging the local insurance industry in the discussion and about risk in high risk areas and how to reach people. But I think that, again, that's really happening at a local level. I've seen it on the ground and how it works, but the discussions that you're talking about probably need to be happening at a much higher scale. So I think at a local level, your local governments, so your planners are often your floodplain administrators, are often your CRS people as well. They're doing everything, and they're doing, I think, the best they can with the resources they have. But the discussion is a much higher level discussion that you're talking about that needs to happen. Yeah. I do think we didn't have anybody from the floodplain mapping program here today or hazard mitigation side of things. And I do think that I don't know that there's any advocacy going on, but I do know that there's concern and following about at a state level what's happening with insurance and how we educate homeowners about insurance.
And I think Tancred has one more point to add on that.
Yeah, I can add on the insurance side. There's the federal National Flood Insurance Program, there's state insurance, wind pool, et cetera, and then there's private sector insurance. And I can promise you the private sector, they're 6 steps ahead of us. So they're the ones that are insuring a lot of that private property. On the NFIP side, that's Congress is going to make those decisions. And on the state side, again, it's our General Assembly. So as long as there's money to be made, there's going to be private sector involvement. NFIP, they've tried to sort of reinvent themselves with this risk rating 2.0 and trying to get to more actuarial rates on insurance. But there's pushback because there's a lot of property involved, a lot of people involved, so a lot of politics, right? So the short answer, I guess, is once there's money made, there's going to be insurance, and there's going to be, these decisions will continue to be made. And
Great question for election day, huh? I think we have time for one more question. If anybody's dying to ask one last question. And if not, we're going to release everybody to lunch. But I do want to say thank you one more time for this wonderful panel. You all did a great job. And thank you to the audience for sticking through the end. We appreciate that too.